we are. That was 5 decades. So I'm amazingly well preserved for a guy who's had a career of 5 decades. Great. So, what did they ask me to talk about today? Is there a picture of it? Yeah, there is. It says, when to begin grazing. And I'm at a little bit of a disadvantage. I don't have it in front of me what I'm talking about. Is it okay if I get down at floor level and walk around? You all seen me? So I'm going to come down here so I can see what's going on as well. So, after we talk about when to get started grazing, and the emphasis is in the spring, and spring's just around the corner. I know some of you have had a tough time out there. You probably won't believe me if I told you that almost all of February is starting in We're definitely hoping to get some snow. Pretty good snow or something. We are dry.
And then if you don't turn the other one, it's not recording.
Our average annual precipitation where we live is 8 inches, plus or minus. A dry year for us is we get 3. A wet year is get all the way up to 13. So you say, hey, yeah, more than 13 inches rainfall there. We also have to manage irrigation. Now, I worked many, many years in Missouri in a high natural rainfall environment. Besides the ranch, and I'm going to say here, we don't own a ranch in Idaho. We manage hear me now? All right. I'm no longer wired. I can really move now. Okay, so if the pasture isn't ready, we start going the other way and suffer the consequences of reduced animal performance. And if we go out there and short grass, and we bite it too short and it's not growing back, and the cows are now having to go 58 miles a day to try to find a bite to eat, and the pasture's kept grazed down short all the time, it's not going to have a chance to ever get ahead of the cattle. It's going to be diminished in the summertime, and guess what? Rather than beginning to feed hay after Thanksgiving, you're feeding hay on Labor Day. So this is an important decision about when you commence grazing. So we need to think about what defines when the pasture is ready to start grazing. And this can be an interactive session as long as nobody comes up here, takes the microphone, and tries to dominate the floor. You can shout back at me, yes, no, things like that, 86%, whatever. Is this pasture ready to be grazed? What do you say?
No.
I hear no, I hear yeses. Ah, great, we have a difference of opinion. You know what the correct answer is, everybody, right?
Yeah.
It depends. All right, let me set you a scenario. There is no more hay in the stack yard. The neighbor will sell you hay, but he wants $180 a ton for it. Is this pasture ready to be grazed?
Yes.
Yes. All right. If you still have 86 rolls out there under the hedgerow, and it's kind of warm, and you know this is going to grow quite a bit in the next week, do you need to graze this pasture?
No.
No. And it might be in the best interest of your livestock in the pasture to not graze it. So we have not only a biological consideration of how is this plant going to respond to grazing, we also have the financial question of what's it going to cost me to either graze or not graze this pasture. And we always have to be considering both of those aspects. That's the, we can, in our research setting, we can do trials of, clip this off to 4 inches to 3 inches to 2 inches to 1 inch, different heights, and we can look at what the growth response is. And so, from a strictly academic sense, we could say that, well, with this particular pasture mixture, it needs to be at least 10.4 inches tall before you begin grazing. But the reality is, am I going to go broke? Am I going to stay in business? And so we have to balance those things there. Another important aspect of this is, well, what are you going to do tomorrow? Now, if you go out on that pasture at that height and park cattle out on that pasture for a month versus moving them off tomorrow, will that make a difference? Absolutely. What about if we have cattle versus sheep? Do cattle and sheep graze differently, or is it exactly the same if you graze it with cattle or sheep? Different? Okay. If we look at how cattle graze, the way they graze most effectively, they take that big old tongue, throw it out around the water fork, hold it to their mouth, it shears off. Now with grass, it's only grass and clovers, when they're only this tall, there's very little fiber in that plant, right? So if a cow grabs a lot of that pasture and tears it off, what's the residual height going to look? What's the residual going to look like? Almost nothing. Because the natural shear point in that plant right now is down near the base. The cow takes the bite of that, and we're going to be just about an inch, inch and a half of leafless stem is all that's going to be left out there, right? And so it's going to be very slow to recover because we've taken away all the leaves. But sheep, they graze like that, and we could put sheep out there, and because they could pick individual plant parts, they could take off the top leaves, remove them off of there, we're left with a lot of leaf behind, and so in a sheep setting, this might regrow very rapidly, very nicely. A lot of people think I say it depends because I have no real opinions and I don't really know. I can't give a yes or no answer. I use it depends because it depends on what we're going to do. So, our basic strategy in the spring is to go out to pasture, let the stock take a bite, and then move them on. And if you do that, it really doesn't matter how early you start grazing, as long as you allow ample recovery after the fact. You can start grazing very early if the stock take a bite, move on, and then you let it recover. This is based on work done both in Idaho at the ARS station in Kimberly, and then also some work Lee Mansky has done in North Dakota. And it's looking at if we go out onto a pasture at kind of that stage, and we'll get very specific about this in a minute, at what that stage is, this is what happens. If we park on that pasture for 2 weeks, we're going to give up 10 to 20% of the total production of the season. If we go out on that particular stage of grass and park on it for 4 weeks or a month, we're giving up 30 to 40% of the annual production potential, and we're out there for 6 weeks, we cut in half what the production potential of that pasture for the entire season is going to be. That's kind of a big deal if you reduce your pasture production by half. That's why it's so important that we take spring and manage spring growth and manage it effectively. And probably more than any other aspect of grazing management in those 5 decades that I have been working in grazing management, that's the biggest question and issue that I encounter just repeatedly. And I can tell you that in 2010, and so that was well into my 5 decades of experience, I screwed up totally. I did everything wrong. Because I have Alzheimer's because I'm so damn old? No. Because I thought something would happen that didn't happen. I thought grass would grow in the spring. Usually it does. Occasionally it doesn't. I increased the stocking rate by 35% over what we've been doing the previous 5, 6 years we've been in Idaho. I'll tell you why. Because up on our Forest Service allotment, we had 25 calves killed by wolves. And so we didn't take any cows, 475 pairs that normally go up on the forest, didn't go up on the forest, and I had to take about 150 cows more than what I was used to running on the place. I said, oh yeah, we can handle it. I started too early. I grazed the pasture too short because of that natural shear foraging with grass. That's where it's going to tear off if you start on a little bit of grass. And I came back to it too soon. The 4 cardinal sins of grazing: overstock, start too early, graze too short, come back too soon. That was just 5 years ago that I did that. Did I learn my lesson? Absolutely, I learned my lesson. Should have read that book again, I guess. So, what is overgrazing? Let's define what overgrazing actually is. Overgrazing is simply biting the plant before it has had a chance to recover to a positive carbohydrate balance. There's not a lot of leaf out in that pasture there. What little bit is out there is getting bitten off repeatedly. And so the photosynthetic energy, the little bit that that plant is able to capture, is basically going to survive, not producing, a big abundant pasture that's going to carry a lot of livestock. Okay, so that's what overgrazing is, biting the plant before it has a positive carbohydrate balance. 2 ways that happens. One is we stay on the pasture too long and allow the animals to take what we call the second bite. New regrowth coming from stored carbohydrates, we bite it off. There's not enough leaf area to support photosynthesis, create new growth, tries to regrow again from stored carbohydrate, we bite it off again. That's one way that overgrazing occurs. And the previous slide, 2 slides back that we were looking at, about what happens when you stay 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks on the same pasture in the spring of the year. That's the kind of overgrazing we're talking about. Taking the second bite, the third bite, the fourth bite, the fifth bite, the sixth bite, and then there's nothing left to bite at all. And then the other way that it happens is returning to the pasture too soon. We say, oh yeah, we got that equipped ready, we put in the electric fencing, we put in the water, we're rotating cattle all the time. I've got 20 pastures, so I come back every 20 days. And you know what? In the spring of the year, 20 days might be okay, but most of the year, it's not near enough rest period in most parts of the country with most plant species that we deal with. And so that's the second type of overgrazing that we get. Coming back to the pasture before it has reached the positive carbohydrate balance. So this is the point where somebody says, so Jimmy, how do we know that a plant has a positive carbohydrate balance? We need to have a technique for assessing that. Come on, if I screw up all the electronics. Help, help. My slide, oh, there it goes, there it goes. Did it go 9 slides? Push buttons all the time. That's why most people, okay. So, this is the question that we often get asked. Well, how tall should it be? What's the right sward height? What's the answer? It depends. It depends on what species we're dealing with, right? It depends on whether it rained a lot or rained a little. It depends. Height is one of the worst criteria that we can use to assess whether it's time to start grazing. And guess what? For the first 3 decades of that 5 decades that I worked in, I talked about height a lot, appropriate grazing height. I've just come to learn that it's not necessarily what we're looking for. Okay, so all right, there's 2 grass plants. And excuse me, dyslexic. I don't know what's left behind. Okay. Okay. So on this picture, you look up here, and is the left-hand plant or the right-hand plant more ready to graze?
Right.
Why? It's got more leaves. That's what really matters. Not what the type of the plant is, but how many leaves it has. How much leaf surface area, because we're all about photosynthesis. Okay, so leaf stage is more important than just the plant type. And the way we count leaves is like this. You know, a leaf basically has 3 components. There's the leaf blade, where all the real photosynthetic action takes place. That's what we like to have a lot of, is leaf blade. We have the sheath. That's the part that wraps around the stem. And then where they come together, we have the top. That's the kind of hinge point. A leaf is fully developed when the pollen forms. And so when we're counting leaves that the pollen has formed them. So fully extended, fully developed leaves. Both of these plants here are at the 4th leaf stage. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 fully emerged leaves. These are actually the same species on the previous slide. It said western wheatgrass, which for those of you in the east is quackgrass. They're essentially the same plant, except out in the west it's a native range grass. In your crop field it's quackgrass, and we got to kill it. Great grazing grass. So what do you suppose the difference is? These are the same plant species. They both have 4 leaves on. What's the difference? Well, the maturity is the same because they both have 4 leaves. And at this point, I'll say, in good growing conditions, in cool season grasses, you know, at their peak growth in the spring, they're going to be popping out a new leaf every 5 to 7 days. When it's hot and dry, they might be 2 to 3 weeks or longer between putting out a new leaf. So, a set of plants, whether we're talking about orchard grass plants something very, very simple. Water. The tall tillers there are from the irrigated side of our fence. The short tillers are from the dryland side of the fence. That's the difference right there. It's simply water. Guess what? When you have more water, you can put leaves out faster. When you have no water, leaves come out very slowly. Water makes grass grow. Rocket science. Okay. So one of our goals, after getting off winter feed, is to set up a forage supply for the remainder of the year. And I'm going to use a rule of thumb. Now, always remember that rules of thumbs are meant to be broken. In precipitation environments with less than 30 inches, which is West Virginia's bad year, it's us. It's never been 30 inches in the Cimarron Valley in Idaho. Well, maybe 2.7 million years ago or something, it rained that much. No. So, in a dry environment, we plant one grazing cycle a year per 10 inches of precipitation or water. So in our 8-inch rainfall environment, we don't graze, on our range, we don't graze every pasture every year. Up on our, the Forest Service allotment is about 160,000 acres. There's 13 pastures out there. 3 or 4 of those pastures we don't use in any given year. Only 9 to 10 of them are going to get grazed. And that's because we don't have enough water to support grazing every pasture every year. This next picture over on the right is central Nebraska, 25-inch precipitation environment. Because there's more water, we can expect the plants to recover a little better, be grazing a little more frequently. So there, we're looking at 2.5 cycles. Now, what does that mean? It means every pasture is going to get grazed twice during the growing season, and then about half of them will get grazed again in the dormant season in the wintertime. Well, you all get more than 30 inches of precipitation, so let's look at what happens there. As you add more water into the environment, the plants grow more. So you can actually get more forage yield out of an inch of water in West Virginia than we get out of an inch of water in Idaho. That makes sense? And so when we get in environments over 30 inches, and obviously that 30 inch is just kind of an arbitrary dividing point, we figure you can run one grazing cycle per 7 inches of water. So in Missouri, where we were at 38-inch natural precipitation, we'd be looking at 5 to 6 grazing cycles in a year. And that's about what we did. Now recognize we were grazing year round. Our growing season was about 230, 240 days, but our grazing season was 365 days. And so we would run 5 to 6 grazing cycles. That's one about every other month a pasture got grazed. Irrigation, same thing. We take our 8 inches of natural rainfall, irrigate with 24 inches of water, and so on our irrigated pastures, we expect about 4 cycles. So when you have that kind of viewpoint, you begin to think about planning when are those grazing cycles going to happen through the year, and what you do in the spring, in basically the first 6 weeks of the growing season, sets up your pasture for what you're going to be able to expect for the remainder of the season. So that's another one of the goals of spring grazing management, is getting the plants set up, staged out, so that they're going to be producing green feed for you through the summer months. That's what we're looking for in our spring management. If we let the pastures get too mature before we graze them in the spring, we will never accomplish those multiple cycles. If we graze them too short in the spring and set the pastures back, we're not going to get those number of cycles. This is a pasture in what I would call high phase 2. And you can see on the bottom, well, it's mixed grasses. That particular photo I took didn't, there wasn't much of a yield there. And I wanted a picture that, where we could clearly see what the pasture or the grasses were looking like. So it's a little over a foot high. And in terms of leaf stage, that's about 4.5 to 5 leaf stage. Now I'm just saying something very important when we were talking about leaf stage. You're probably familiar with the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 growth concept. Phase 1, typically the grass plants are going to have fewer than 2.5 to 3 leaves. 2.5 to 3.5 leaf stage is where we're transitioning out of phase 1 into the rapid growth part of phase 2. That's 2.5 to 3.5 leaves. The top side of phase 2 is going to be roughly 5 leaves. And then we progress into phase 3. Positive carbohydrate balance. Plant moves from negative carbohydrate balance, which means there's more energy flow upward in the plant than downward in the plant. That's the phase 1, phase 2 transition. That corresponds to about 3 leaves. And so if you're looking to see if your plants have a positive carbohydrate balance, just walk through the pasture, pick 10 grass tillers. If you have more than 3 or more leaves per tiller, your plants are in a positive carbohydrate state in all likelihood. It only depends on where the sun shines. Some fertility things, but in general, if you have more than 3 leaves, that's when you know the plants are in a positive carbohydrate balance. So this is high phase 2. To me, this is a very appropriate grazing stage. You can see the orchard grass has some seed heads on it. For the grasses that are in this pasture, orchard grass is the earliest heading grass, the wheatgrass, the red top, the meadow brome, they're all going to head later than what the orchard grass is. So even though you see a few heads, overall the sport is high phase 2. What we want to do now is go in at a high stock density, short grazing period. I've basically been on daily rotation since the late 1980s. It's what I'm habituated to doing. Occasionally, I move more than once a day. Occasionally, particularly if I'm going away, we'll set up the pastures for 2 days or even 3 days. But when I'm on the ranch, we move every day. Our normal, and tomorrow morning I'll talk about stock density, stock density. Yes, I will. So our normal everyday stock density that we operate, we're usually somewhere in the 60 to 90,000 pounds of animal live weight per acre on daily rotation. That's generally the stock density that we're working at. Okay, so if we go in with the right stock density for our target period of time, this is the type of residual that we want to leave behind. That's 4 to 5 inches. You see lots of green leaf there. If we take the bite, get off the pasture, this will start regrowing very quickly. Okay, there's a nice little growth response curve there. This is some work we did when I was at the University of Missouri. And we have residual height in inches, daily growth rate, pounds per acre per day up there. And you can just look at that curve and see the shorter the residual, tighter we graze it, the slower the regrowth rate. Now this regrowth rate is based on the time that it takes to grow back 1 ton of feed. So that's the window of time, the point of reference that we're looking at. To grow 1 ton of feed, this is the growth rate. So if you look at about 4 inches and then running up towards 8 inches, there's really not a lot of difference. You can leave it anywhere between 4 and 8, we get very similar recovery. But as soon as you start taking another bite, and you take it down below that 4-inch level, we see less recovery. This is the pasture mix that we were working with there. I think it would be very similar to a lot of pastures that we might see around the Appalachians. I don't know how you want to say that. It's kind of like Caribbean and Caribbean. July, the Caribbean, season me, and it's still the Appalachians. I'm sorry if that's not how it's supposed to say. Okay, so if we look at this and we see at the forage residual, we're getting about 50 pounds per acre per day recovery rate. It takes us 40 days to grow 1 ton of feed. Well, that's a pretty cool relationship. All right. In America, and I've been to several other continents and a lot of countries that are supposed to be grazing experts and way better than what we are in this country. Every one of these nations, farmers, ranchers, have the same affliction: fear of wasting grass. Have any of you ever gone out to the pasture thinking you were going to move the stock? You get there, look over the fence and say, oh, they can stay another day, and walk away. You may have never done that, but I bet you have neighbors that have done that. And why did they do that? Because they were afraid of wasting grass. Now, moving from conventional agriculture and just turning the cattle out, set stock and that, to go into daily rotation and thinking about all the stuff that we're going to be thinking about for the next 2 days. It is a recovery program, and there's 12 steps. And if you've ever been in rehab, one of the things that you do is, as a group for support, you say things together. And this is where we begin. The path to recovery from the fear of wasting grass. I'm going to say it, and then we're all going to say it together. I will have no fear of wasting grass. Are we ready? I will have no fear of wasting grass. There is no such thing as wasted grass. If you approach management from the viewpoint that, number 1, grass feeds grass. Number 2, grass feeds the soil. Number 3, grass feeds the livestock. If you take it in that order, you will rarely run out of grass. You won't be afflicted by droughts like your neighbors are. Yeah, you'll still have to make some adjustments in management, absolutely, but you're not going to dry out near as fast. Most farmers and ranchers go in with the viewpoint that, gotta feed the cows, gotta feed the cows, gotta feed the cows. And if you go in, and that's your perspective of what pasture is for, gotta feed the cows, gotta feed the cows, every time there's a 2-week dry spell, you're going to be running out of grass, and you're nervous, and you're going to be down at the coffee shop bitching with everybody else about this drought. There ain't no drought till you make it, is what it really comes down to. So, now I took this picture. It's almost exactly 10 years ago now. And when I was doing a talk like this, 9 years ago, and we asked the question, do we move or do we leave them? The majority of people, what did they say? Leave them. Oh, there's a lot of grass back there. Now I ask the same question, and I set this up. Because now you don't know that you're supposed to say, oh, move them, move them, move them. Yeah, but most times when I use this same picture, nowadays, most people say, oh, move them on, move them on. That's great. That means we have made real progress in grazing management in this country. What happens if we do leave them another day? We came to the fence and said, they can stay another day. This is where we end up. Now we're grazing down into the phase 1 residual. You don't see near the green leaf here, so we're not going to have the solar energy capture. We're going to have a much slower recovery rate. And I bet we don't grow as much grass in a year. How much is that recovery rate much slow? Based on the Missouri work that we did, grazed down to 2 inches, it took 64 days to grow a ton of seed. So let's just put that in the context of a 180-day growing season. And if by leaving 4 inches, you can grow a ton in 40 days, and biting it down to 2 inches, well, you got more out of it, you didn't waste grass. It takes 64 days to grow a ton. Look at that difference. 2.8 tons versus 4.5 tons to the acre. No We didn't put on more fertilizer. We didn't suddenly go out and install an irrigation system. The sole change here is you making a decision of how much grass you're willing to waste. Let's say it one more time. I will have no fear of wasting grass. There was no wasted grass by leaving that extra 2 inches out there. We had a better photosynthetic factory. We grew more grass. And that's why I say you have to go in from the outset thinking grass grows grass, grass feeds the soil, then grass feeds the livestock. I see this in New Zealand, in Ireland, in Uruguay, in America, in Mexico, in Canada. Every country has the same problem of grazing too short, too many times. And when you start finding the better grazers, one of the first things that you learn is they have no fear of wasting grass, and they leave more residual behind. And it makes a huge, huge difference. Next objective is how do we create this higher quality pasture in the summertime. I think you've already kind of get the gist of it. But we're going to have a discussion of quality here. Come on. I wonder if I stand up here. Aim this better. It might be better, but I have too much energy to stand there in one place. So what's the biggest factor determining what forage quality is going to be? It is maturity. It's simply what stage of growth is that plant at. On the right side, how can you swing the thing around? It's like a magic wand, and then push the button, it does. On the right side of the fence, that is cow feed. That's cow maintenance feed. You know, cows and calves will do okay on the right side of the fence if we don't ask them to eat too much of it. Dry cows need every bit of that and they'll be fine. If we have stockers or sheep carrying triplets, or we're trying to do pasture finished beef, we better have feed like on the left side of the fence. That's where the energy is, that's where the protein is, that's where the performance is. Maturity, more than anything else, determines what your forage quality is going to be. So I know there are some grazing experts out there who say, don't worry about that, don't worry about it. You know, let it get maturity, go in there, just let them, you know, bite the tops off of it. What happens to your carrying capacity when you do that? That's a big financial question right there. So what we're trying to do with our spring grazing management is get as many acres as possible into, or keep as many acres as possible in phase 2. Here's just that classic illustration of phase 1. Classic tastes great, less filling. It's when we have a limited amount of leaf area, slow growth taking place, and animals love to eat this stuff. And that's why they're always going back to the same spots in continuous graze settings and chewing off those same spots, which is phase 1 forage. Just tastes great, but less fill. In phase 2, that begins when we get more leaves out there, capturing more solar energy. So remember, 2.5, 3 leaves is when we're transitioning out of phase 1 into phase 2. And then the top side of phase 2, depending on species, we're going to have 4 or 5 grasses like Timothy and smooth gum to carry, 6 or 7 leaves. So it's going to be upwards there. But as we go through phase 2, yield is going up, but quality is declining because the plants are becoming more mature. How do we get plants, grass plants, clover, and alfalfa that will stand up and be standing up there foot and a half tall? What does it take for plants to have the strength to do that? Cellulose and lignin, the indigestible components of the plant. That is why a plant can stand up and get tall. If it's down close to the ground, growing cross we lose digestible energy out of the plant. That gets us into this phase 3 deal. And we got another name for phase 3. What's that? Hay. Yeah. I don't. Now, in our rangeland environment, the vast majority of what we graze is phase 3. Because all of our range grass grows in about 45 to 60 day time period and nothing else happens. But you have a long growing season. You have rain. You have an abundance of moisture. You need to capitalize on that and capitalize on it by growing high quality leaves, not woody stems. There are some people I know over the last few years have put forth that the notion that the top part of the plant is high in energy and low in protein, and that the bottom of the plant is low in energy and high in protein. I've never seen one shred of evidence that that's true. I have asked a number of people to provide, the information, the analysis that shows that to be the case. This is more often what you see. Now, this is from my friend Jason Roundtree up at Michigan State, but from Missouri, we have hundreds of samples, stratified samples that show the same thing. So what we have in the blue bar is the bottom third of the plant, the red bar is the middle third of the plant, the green bar is the top third of the plant. You can see that both protein and energy increase are highest in the top part of the plant, lowest in the bottom part of the plant. And in fact, the decline in protein content from the top third to the bottom third is more pronounced and dramatic than the decline in energy. So, as you are raising different classes of livestock, this is where the idea of asking them to eat more of that plant or less of that plant comes into play. Because we can take some pretty rank pasture, and if we have growing stockers or finishing animals, and we only ask them to eat 15 to 20% of that plant, we can still get performance out of it. It's when we ask them to eat 50% of it, or even a higher percentage, that they're going to crash and burn. If we have dry cows, animals with lower nutrient requirement, we can eat deeper into that plant without hurting performance. What drives the grasses to head out? And I've said very little about legumes here. My experience over these 5 decades is that if you base your grazing management, your severity of grazing, the length of recovery period, when you initiate grazing, if you base that on managing for healthy, vigorous grass growth, the legumes will largely take care of themselves. I don't worry too much about going into legumes at the bud stage or at full bloom stage, because in my experience, they'll largely take care of themselves. The grass, it's easier, in my experience, it's easier to eliminate grass out of the pasture than it is the legumes. Oh, unless you're set stocking, low stocking rates, then all of your clovers and legumes will go away. But if you are managing intensively, frequent rotation and all that, it's far easier to maintain legumes, and we don't worry about them so much. So, on cool season grasses, the fescue, the orchard grass, the timothy, the browngrass, ryegrass, the first heading is driven by photoperiod, by the length of the day. That's why when you have a real early spring, the grasses, you have a longer period of vegetation. The grasses will head out approximately the same time, but the photoperiod is given. You'll see grasses heading a little earlier in an early spring, but generally they're driven by photoperiod. A lot of the cool season grasses will only head one time, only on that spring growth cycle. And so if through your grazing management you can eliminate the heading process, and this is where I'm going to come specifically to fescue. You know, the most toxic part of enophyte infected fescue is the seed head, followed by the stem, leaf sheath, and the least toxic part is the leaf blade. Our goal, when we were in Missouri, we took pastures that were 90+% fescue. So there's less than 10% of anything else out there. and just through grazing management, we turned them into pastures that were 70% something else and only 30% fescue. And the key to our success in doing that was very aggressive spring grazing. We tried to get over all of our pasture acres twice in the first 40 to 45 days of the growing season. And by doing that, we were getting fescue seed heads bitten out just as they were elongated. And the fungus does not grow immediately. I mean, as your seed head is coming up, the fungus is not right there with it. The fungus lags a little behind. So if we can get seed heads bitten off before they emerge, when they're 5, 6, 8, 10 inches off the ground, by that quick cycling in the spring, aggressive grazing, we can all but eliminate any seed head development in tall fescue and create a much leafier sward to go into the summer, so it's going to be more nutritious, lower toxicity, because fescue is only a dominating, choking out plant if you allow it to be. We do that early aggressive grazing, then allow appropriate summer recovery periods, and that allowed our legumes, our warm season grasses. We brought native prairie grass strongly back into fescue pastures with nothing other than aggressive spring grazing and then adequate rest periods in the summer. There are a few exceptions to the heading. Timothy, bluegrass, and perennial ryegrass will head out on every growth cycle that they make in the season. But orchard grass, fescue, browns, wheatgrasses only head to one time. On warm season grasses, the heading out and maturing is driven by accumulated heat days. Basically identical to corn. The more heat days you accumulate, the earlier the warm season grasses are going to head out. There is some photo period, but it's the shortening of the day length that affects their heading. Once you take the main growing point off of the native warm season grasses, your big blue stem Indian grass, eastern gamma grass, there's not much tillering, so you don't get much new leafy growth coming from them. Switchgrass does head or can head on multiple growth cycles. So it's really about managing seed head development where we're going to have a great effect on forage quality. Species composition makes a difference in forage quality. This is the basic ranking that we use for grasses and legumes. Now, forbs, your non-legume broadleaf plants, from a nutritional standpoint and soil development standpoint, are an important part of the pasture as well. I don't have them listed here because there are some of those forbs that are as high quality as cool season annuals, and there are some of them that are as poor quality as your warm season perennials. So the forbs kind of distribute all through here. In general, cool season plants are higher nutritional value than warm season plants. Annuals are higher nutritional value than perennials. Legumes are higher nutritional value than grasses. In a pasture, across what we call the transition zone, kind of the main fescue belt of the upper south, Midwest, or upper south, lower Midwest, on up into southern Pennsylvania, into Ohio, you can grow warm season grasses. Warm season grasses were native across that whole swath of country. You can grow cool season grasses. You can grow legumes. So in a pasture, I want to have all of these things plus the fork, because that gives me a broad growing season, a broad range in nutrient value. If you have this kind of mixture, most days of the year, you're going to have something out there that has good nutrition in it. And it gives you a huge mineral diversity out there in the plant. And so the animals on a nice diverse patch like this, mineral supplementation can become unnecessary. That's just what I feel. Okay, now I've got, again, going back to work we did in Missouri, there's growth curves here from two types of pasture. The red one was tall fescue, nitrogen. That was 3 40-pound applications through the year. That's largely what drives that red growth curve. Nitrogen fertilizer and yes, come on, yeah, and reproductive growth. A big part of that peak in the red is just stems and seed heads. When you put fertilizer on in the spring of the year, and your animal number is based on your summer grazing capacity, you are going to have way excess pasture in the spring. And most of it's going to be crap, just those seed heads and stems. The lower one is a multi-species grass legume mixture, no nitrogen fertilizer at all, and you can see that it's a very different shaped growth curve. The interesting thing about this is if you just take the average growth of that, there's almost no difference between the nitrogen fertilizer, fertilized one, and so the total productivity at the end of the year is essentially the same. Which one of those is going to be easier to manage in grazing? The big red roller coaster or that gently rolling green one? The gently rolling green one is way easier to manage because you don't have the extremes in the growth rate. You don't produce that abundance of low quality forage in the spring of the year. The 23 years that we were on the farm in Missouri, there were 3 occasions that I ever put nitrogen fertilizer on a pasture. 2 of those is when we were growing annual ryegrass, and annual ryegrass is very responsive to clover, so we did, or nitrogen, so we did that. The other time was we had stockers. We had 120 custom grazed stockers that would come in. It was a late spring. We were feeding them hay. I needed to get them off hay. So we put, I can't remember if it was 40 units of nitrogen on 60 acres or 60 units on 40 acres. But we put nitrogen on a targeted area to try to accelerate the pasture growth so we could get those stockers off of hay feed. 23 years of grazing in Missouri, only 3 times we ever used nitrogen fertilizer. Since we've gone to Idaho, and this will be our 10th full season managing pastures there, we've put on nitrogen 4 times. Why? Because the only way we can get phosphorus is as 1152 up. And we are phosphorus deficient, so we put on phosphorus out there, and we had that tag along bit of nitrogen at 1152 up. We run on legume nitrogen fixation, building organic matter through our grazing management, and good manure distribution through our high stock densities. You do those things, and you can pretty well take nitrogen fertilizer out of the program. And then fertility, and these are just basic stuff you see in guide sheets that legumes fix nitrogen, grasses use nitrogen, legumes need more micronutrients to support their growth than the grasses, yada, yada, yada. But the important thing that I really want to bring out on the fertility side of it is a living biologically active soil. Did I talk about this 10 years ago? No. And I'm embarrassed to the point that 10 years ago, the kind of stuff that I believed that talked about when it came to soil nutrient management, the revolution in soil health that's taken place over the last decade. Wow! I wish I had known that stuff back in the first, second, third, fourth decade of my career. But it's really the microbial life, the invertebrates in the soil, the biological activity in the soil that drives the nutrient cycle processes. And so when we look at the native plant communities, the prairies, how were they so productive when there wasn't some guy there pouring fertilizer on them? Well, they were so productive because they had healthy soil life beneath them. And that's the direction we're trying to move all our pastures these days. We work towards getting our winter forage supply. Big important question here. Why should stocking rates be the same year-round and carrying capacity is not? We know we have a lot more grass in the spring than we have in the winter time. Should we be stocking the farm at the same level in the winter? Are we going to So the one really big realization that came to me back when we were in Missouri that got us out of being a conventional make and feed hay operation to a year-round grazing operation was when I realized that we should stock, we consider cow-calf to be our center price, that we should stock our cow herd based on our winter grazing capacity, not our summer grazing capacity. If you're stocked at your summer grazing capacity, you pretty well guaranteed you're going to have excess grass in the spring that you're going to want to bale up as hay and then feed it out all winter. So we moved from being strictly a cow-calf operation to being a combined cow-calf and custom grazing operation. Added summer enterprises. So we brought in more stock April, May, June, July, had it off the place by early August. That's how we ate up our spring and early season forage. It created a revenue stream, a cash flow into the operation, whereas when we were making hay, all we were really doing was incurring a cost against our cow-calf operation. And then the acres where the summer and the contract livestock grazed, because we got them on around the beginning of August, we were able to stockpile those acres to become the winter cow feed supply. So the blue bar, about 60% of our total pork production in a year went into our cow operation, about 40% went into our custom grazing, and that 40% was concentrated, as I said, in April, May, June, and July. And I already said whether it is. Now, about hay. I think, and if, how many people have read Pick the Hay? Several, good. You know, in there I say it is far more important to stop making hay than it is to stop feeding hay. Making hay on your own property, to me, is not a very good use of your land or use of your pump. But if you do have to make hay, and you're in a grazing operation, there's two ways to approach it. One is you say, okay, I'm going to set aside this field, this field, this field for hay. And then I just got to pick a day pasture. So we say there's 3 we're going to cut for hay, 5 we're going to graze. Well, you're going to screw up grazing one of those 5, and it's going to get woolly and out of control or something. And so you might decide to go ahead and hay it also. So you hay off the ones you close the gate on, you hay off the messed up ones, and then you're down to only 3 or 4 pastures to work with, and it's getting hotter, it's getting drier, and suddenly you're chewing those into the ground because you set something aside to make hay. We started out doing it this way, and that was one of the first things I learned is, that's not the way I want to do this. The other approach is you graze everything, look where you screwed up the worst, and then use your hay harvest to correct your grazing mistake. And that's much more the way, that I would prefer to do it if I were making hay. So, but some there, make hay harvesting a management tool to create quality pasture rather than just a bad habit. So summing this up, keys to initiating grazing are knowing, understanding how plants grow in spring of the year. They're going to head out. We can manage in a way to minimize that. We don't want to bite them off, too short and slow their rate of recovery. We want to take that bite, get off, know how long in your environment, how long does it take the plant to get to that recovered state of 4 or 5 or more leaves out there. Because when you graze at that 4 or 5 or more leaves, you're always grazing when the plant's in a positive carbohydrate state, and it's harder to overgraze it. With fescue specifically, we do this in general, but with fescue specifically, graze aggressively in the spring to take its dominating characteristic away, to take its toxic seed heads away. Then, once you have the fescues to do, then allow the recovery periods to be long enough to allow the clovers, the warm season grasses, the desirable forage to come in there. And then I think it's very important to plan for a variable stocking rate. Increase your numbers when you have a lot of forage being produced. Decrease your numbers when you don't. And there's some contact information. Usually I would have a book at this point, but I didn't bring my book for it. I don't. And I'm going to put these out at the registration desk. This is brochures for our business, American Grazing Land Services. Besides doing the speaking like this, I do on-farm and ranch consulting. We sell fenced stock water. But if you want to get in touch with me, visit about grazing issues, there's contact information. That, of course, is also brochures. Do we have any kind of questions? Have I burned it all up?
Alright, go ahead and cut it a second.
One burning question, right here in front. Okay, the question was, how do you calculate what your winter grazing capacity is? That's largely a question of how long winter is. You know, what we decided to do is, our winter in Missouri we figured was a third of the year. And so we wanted to be in a position where we could stockpile a third of the farm that we could carry the cows through the winter time. And then everything is back calculated from that. How many additional animals we had to bring in the spring, when we needed to have them also to grow enough feed on those 1/3 of the acres to produce enough feed. Okay, we're going to stop here. I'm around all day. I'm around all day tomorrow. Joe, thank you